Boker Tov, Talmidim, and welcome once again to Soulful Psalms. We are on the glide path towards the end of this series of presentations. Last 10 Psalms, bringing us to roughly 52, mark the cycle of the year. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about next year, but this has been a delightful series, and I'm glad to be able to share with you the Psalms, which are among my favorite things. So let's continue. So I'm going to start here with something a little different, which is a kind of ritual or a liturgical structure that exists because of the Psalms, and it's called hallel. Hallel, like in hallelujah, means to praise. And it is historically been a collection of 6 Psalms, usually uh, in chronological order or in numeric order, that are recited during Jewish festivals. Now, the one that virtually everyone knows is the one that we use at Pesach, at Passover, which is actually used in all of our festivals and with some disputes around Hanukkah. Minor holiday is entitled to have a hallel. Some say yes, some say no. And more recently, the issue of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. Does the creation of this secular state merit reciting Hallel? Some say yes, some say no. Jews. What can I say? All right. So, but there is at least one other. Aside from the familiar Hallel, there is in fact another Hallel that was created in the 16th century, and that is the 6 Psalms that are recited leading up to Shabbat. It seems only appropriate that Shabbat have its own Hallel, which it does, starting Psalm 95 and working its way through, and then changes to Psalm 29. So we have that. I've mentioned that before, but this is the one we recite at the festivals, and it goes from Psalm 113 to Psalm 118, and it can be done in a couple of different ways. There is the Hallel itself, which is all 6 Psalms, and then there's a Chatzi Hallel, a half Hallel. You may detect that as part of our Passover ritual, where we recite one half before we get to dinner, and then we recite the other half later, and it can be used under different circumstances. So it's an interesting collection. Now, for the hallels that are associated with the holidays, it once again returns to that trope that I've mentioned many times before. What's the most important story in all of Judaism? And the answer has to be the Exodus. So in our particular set of 113, 114, 15, 16, 17, and 18, the first one, 113, is selected probably because it almost seems to be commanding us to do Hallel. Uh, as a rule, in Judaism, we really only acknowledge that a mitzvah is a mitzvah if it appears in the 5 books of Moses. And while there may be commanding language or imperative language elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, we don't assume that that has the force of a mitzvah. But this may be the exception that proves the rule, or what are we, a monument to consistency? Anyway, the opening phrase of 13 probably got included because it seems to be commanding us to say Hallel. It begins Hallelujah, Halu Avdei Adonai, Halu et Shem Adonai. O servants of the Lord, imperative, give praise. Praise the name of the Lord. So that establishes the very idea that we should be reciting this material. So that's where 113 comes into play. It sort of sets the tone for everything else. And in fact, even though it does not mention the Exodus from Egypt, it thematically speaks towards things like who is like the Lord our God, who is enthroned on high, sees what is below in heavens and on earth. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts up the needy from the refuge heap to set them with the great of his people. So, at least in a very generalized terms, that's what happens to us at the Exodus. So, 113 gets things started, but what I really want to talk about is 114, which is explicitly about the Exodus and therefore makes it really the linchpin of this hallel, especially when we're celebrating Pesach. And it begins with the line, when Israel went forth from Egypt. And then the very interesting parallel, the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech. All right. So, Me'oz uh, Loez is, or strange speech, is actually the name of a collection of midrashim about the Exodus from Egypt. So the phrase, which doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, nevertheless has a deep resonance for the Jews reciting it. Anyway, so that's the parallel. Important points of the parallel, as far as the rabbis are concerned, is that when Israel is the first, the house of Jacob is the second. The standard rabbinic interpretation of those two terms is Israel refers to the dudes and house of Jacob refers to the ladies. Okay, it's binary. What can I say? It was produced in a different age, but in any case, it's meant to be inclusive. It's meant to include all of the people of Israel, men and women, children, elderly, etc., etc. And then it goes on, it makes a rather bold claim. Judah becomes his uh, likadsho, his holy thing. What the heck does that mean? It's interpreted in different ways. The JPS says is holy one. We are elevated to a holy people. Or alternately, it makes as much sense to translate it as his sanctuary. In other words, we as a people are God's temple, right? We have our temple in Jerusalem, and God has his temple, which is us, which is a very interesting way of thinking about our relationship with God. So I happen to like the translation, his sanctuary, but I understand that many people come to different conclusions about it. And this first part is entirely national. Uh, it identifies the Exodus as the key, at least to the history that we care about. And then it goes on and describes some of the effects of the events of the Exodus. The sea saw them and fled. Who's them? I assume that's us, but I don't know for sure. Um, some plural group anyway. And Jordan ran backwards, and this refers not just to the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, but also 40 years later when uh, Joshua is able to split the Jordan and allow the people to cross from Moab into the promised land. So it sort of is an inclusio of everything that happens for 40 years, starting with the splitting of the Sea of Reeds and ending with the splitting of the Jordan. So it has a sense of uh, another term for this would be a merism, two extremes and everything in between. All right. The mountains skipped like rams, hills like sheep. We've heard this rhetoric elsewhere. The world trembles. Um, And then it goes into a very odd rhetorical voice. What alarmed you, O sea, that you fled? O Jordan, that you ran backwards? O mountains, that you skipped like rams, and hills like sheep? And then it goes on and says, Tremble, O earth, the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flinty rock into a fountain. And so between the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, and the Jordan, one of the pivotal stories in the Exodus is Moses striking the rock and yielding water. So it's water at the beginning, water at the end, water in the middle of the story. So, and all of these things symbolize chaos and uh, divine support and uh, uh, these different powers working. So, water is there in everything. It's a very carefully structured psalm to give us a sense of what the story of the Exodus was about. But on top of that, there's the whole linguistic thing going on, which is in the middle sections. It is not clear what the tense, or probably the more accurate term is, what is the aspect of this particular announcement? Is it describing something that has happened in the past, which would be the actual Exodus? Or is it describing something that could happen now, meaning that the miracles are technically not over, that we can still count on God to save us? So there is an aspect of this being a historical psalm, but also a psalm that tells us that new possibilities await us. Unexpected forces are out there. This may be a good reason why, for example, we recite this at Hanukkah, because Hanukkah, it's a tiny little miracle. It's a miracle, and it's not one that is attached to the Bible directly in any way. So we relied on God then. We can rely on God now. I think that's enough to say, you know, God was active in history. God is active in the present. All right. It's a psalm of encouragement. We have no idea when it was written, but it's a worthwhile psalm, and it's a good way for us to frame hallel. So I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to talking with you with the next of our last psalms as we go forward. But I'm not going to spend a great deal more time with the hallel psalms. And there's just so much else interesting going. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.